often we've heard from our students that it feels overwhelming. It feels like it's too much. It feels like there is not much what one can do or not much one should do to deal with the threats that face not only democracy but everything else. Isabella, I'm going to turn to you. You were on campus in the middle of all the uproar around protests in the Middle East. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like to the extent that you feel comfortable? And are there any lessons that you would draw from that that would respond to young or college students feeling that I don't have a voice, I can't change this, I can't impact this? What would you say to that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, thinking about the month of April for me is really challenging for so many different reasons. It was the most intense reporting that I've ever done, and also the most intense responsibility I've felt in my life in terms of not only feeling the responsibility for myself and my own safety and conducting my own reporting, but also in the safety of an entire newsroom of other students, and also kind of this weight of the responsibility of covering something accurately and truthfully and fair, and something that I knew everybody was watching and looking and drawing from. And also, you know, particularly at Columbia, there was actually a very unique media ecosystem because our campus was on basically complete lockdown. And so there were these windows of time in which journalists could be like snuck in onto campus, like outside journalists, and it was from 2 to 4 p.m. every single day. And it was this one window that journalists could come in and then they would leave. And we were one of the only sets of people who were there 24/7. And when I say 24/7, I really do mean it. We had set up this sort of, newsroom in one of our libraries just outside where, the lawns were where the encampment was. And we were kind of on a constant edge because, right, so I had gone to DC for the hearing. I went to go watch my president testify before Congress, and that was the same day that the encampment was set up. And when I had come back that day later was the day of the first police sweep. And so after that moment, especially, we were on constant edge. We didn't know when the next sort of action was gonna be. We didn't know potentially how this situation could continue to inflame itself. And as I said, there were so many eyes on our campus and particularly on our coverage. And it was incredibly overwhelming, obviously, and it felt like, how could I, at the time, as a 20-year-old, be kind of given this level of, care and responsibility to be the last person to see a story that is going to go out. And at the time, we were getting millions of page views, right? We're talking about an unprecedented number of engagement with our coverage. And I think that what really drove me, which was really interesting, was people around us in terms of like operating in this bigger media ecosystem, people around us were fascinated by Columbia, right? And part of what motivated us was we would have been here and we would have been covering this no matter if there were other people doing this, right? We weren't covering this story because it was a big story. We were covering this story because it was my community, our community. It was people that I cared about, right? In terms of, I cared about the self-betterment of this university. And so, part of what motivated us was not external to again, the eyes on us or the external excitement or motivations. It was the fact that this is a community that I have followed my entire time at Columbia. And not only that, much of my own newsroom, we were familiar with this storyline since October, right, of 2023. And we had spent so much time building such strong relationships with the people that we were reporting on, making mistakes. In covering this this storyline, we had dealt with a lot of issues of mistrust, of concerns over doxing, concerns over identity and being potentially tied to something, or there were so many complicated ethical issues with this reporting, and we had certainly not been perfect with all of them, again, as a student newsroom, as one that was learning and growing while we were covering it, but we had spent months of that before we had gotten to the most intense moments. And so I think there's a series of different lessons there in terms of, one is like to really center and ground yourself, especially in those moments where it feels really overwhelming. It's like, what is your goal and what is your purpose, and how is it motivated by something that is your own deep commitment? Like, for example, in my case, it was I feel committed to this community. I care about my university. My goal as a journalist, yes, is to hold it accountable, is to understand different, like, to be able to report on different viewpoints, to be able to share the many different narratives that existed on my campus. But it was also to imagine how these, confluence of stories were contributing to an overall betterment of other people's knowledge of the university, other people's knowledge of the situation at our university, and also, again, within the community, keeping them informed about the decisions administration was making, things that they, needed to know. But there was also, such a big aspect of that time for us was how much we had to lean on each other. And like the only people that I really had were the other young people who I was kind of going through it with. And especially at that time when I was like hardly sleeping, or if I was sleeping in libraries and on tables and on because we didn't want to leave campus because we were so concerned that something was going to happen. We really relied on each other in a way that we had this common experience, and there was a level of like solidarity of doing this journalism together, and very, very collaborative process in terms of how we approached and dived into it. And overall, it was really a moment in which, yes, I have this sort of what felt like a big burden, a huge responsibility, but also one that I had in a lot of senses embraced, because I sort of saw it as, I saw the good that it was going to produce, and saw like how much people were depending on the coverage that we were writing. And also, I think specific to us was the comparisons people were making to what's, for example, my newspaper was covering versus what other outlets were covering. There was such a stark difference between those two things, and it became sometimes even more and more evident as time went on that we saw how unique our role was in that. And, again, it felt like something we couldn't abandon. And if it wouldn't have been for the other people as well, who really believed, all of us together as a collective in that mission, it would have been much harder. But just a really fascinating experience, but also really showing me that throwing yourself in that deep end sometimes is not as scary if you're with other people, and especially if you're in a young lens with other young people who really understand what you're going through. But that you shouldn't be afraid of that, and that you can embrace that, and you can see the good that it can produce.
I hear a couple of things coming out of what you're saying: not being afraid, grounding yourself, knowing what you stand for, and also being connected to community as you do it. You can't do it alone. And Svante, when we were talking earlier today, you talked a lot about what
I do that sometimes.
you talked a lot about what it means and what your experience is training young people to be, not only ground themselves in their communities, but use that grounding and use that sense of collaboration to further a political cause. Can you talk a little bit about your work doing that with young activists, young politicians?
Absolutely, 100%. Because so one of the things we do at People for the American Way is we train young people to become activists, and we train them to run for office. So brings me to my ulterior motive to coming to Bennington College, is extend an invitation to all of you. We've trained people in all 50 states over the last 20 years. Our network of young elected officials now has over 1,600 members. Our young activists now have over 3,000. And it is overwhelming. I think that's what you said, like it can seem overwhelming. Why get involved in politics? Right? There's so much to fix. I can't fix it all. The first thing I say to all the young people we're training is like, trust that instinct. You can't fix it all. You can't fix it all. The sooner you come to terms with that, the sooner you can start fixing something. Like if you come to politics because you think, I'm gonna be president, and I'm gonna stop us from being an imperialistic country, and I'm gonna end climate change, and we have to end homelessness, and I have to end poverty, and fix it all, you will quit before you even begin. Because not only can you not do that, nobody can. Nobody ever has. Nobody ever has. But collections of people all doing their part have changed the world over and over and over and over again. Like you don't have to even be the one running for office. You can be a field director and train people on how to knock doors. You don't have to run for president. You can run for the Senate, or for some godforsaken reason, Congress. You could run for mayor, the best position there is. You could run for city council. You could run for school board, right? You can run for dog catcher. That's an actual elected position. There are coroners that are elected in the Southeast. I don't know why, but there's elected positions where you can be a coroner. There are all of these opportunities to take public action. The center, what a great name for a center, by the way. At a university, at a college, public action. It is so, and I can say this as the mayor of a college town, we have more PhDs per person than any city in the world. And if you think that's not an annoying place to govern, I encourage you to. But public action is so often the opposite of what happens on campuses, right? Private thinking. Thinking amongst ourselves, talking amongst ourselves, but never going out there and taking action. Let me promise you this. One, you can't do everything, but you will be stunned by how easy it is to do something. Like how easy it is to get actually kind of a lot done. Like knocking on doors to get elected. All right, let me just do this, because again, I'm talking too much. I want to get to more questions. Let me just leave you with this thought experiment. Go and watch C-SPAN, not CNN or Fox News, whatever. Watch C-SPAN for 2 hours. Any 2 hours, you pick the 2 hours. And you are going to see a collection on both sides of the party, the people who've gotten themselves elected to the highest offices in the land. And at the end of those 2 hours, you're going to be like, okay, this can't be that hard if these people are doing it. So, and that should be encouraging. The door is wide open for people of good faith with just a little bit of intention to make quite a difference in your community.
Thank you both. We're going to come to the students in the room in a moment, and those on Zoom, we're going to be taking your questions shortly. I'm going to ask you just to give me a really quick response. Both of you are talking about really heavy responsibilities and being involved in the middle of really overwhelming activities. What do you do for self-care? What do you do to relax? How do you keep a sense of humor or joy? Quick answers. What do you do?
I mean, I live in New York City, so what you would imagine. I mean, I love going out with friends, of course. I love a cute coffee shop and an iced drink.
Good answers.
That's a great answer. Yeah, caffeine is always the answer. Yeah, I like riding my bike. Drums are great because whatever you were angry at before you started playing, you just get to release. And I like fiction. I love fiction. Almost of any sort. TV, movies, but especially books, because it like pulls you out of your bullpucky. Sorry for the language, Bennington, but it pulls you out of your own thing and gives you some much needed perspective. It is so easy to be convinced this midterm is the most serious thing that's ever happened to anybody. And then you like watch Star Wars and you're like, okay, that was more serious. I can go back to studying now.
Thank you both very much. We're going to turn to our students. We're going to begin with Ansar. Ansar, tell us a little bit about who you are at Bennington College and what is your question? Oh, and I'll give you a mic so that you can actually be heard when you do that.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Ansar. I go by Ham. I am a junior here at Bennington College. I study public action and video. My question is regarding the current or past foreign policies of US, especially currently about Israel-Palestine conflict. So my question is, how do you think progressive movements in the US can advocate for a foreign policy that upholds its democratic values, and also addressing the shortcomings of both political parties, which we have seen over the past 6 months, almost a year almost?
You want to solve this one first?
I mean, you know, it's really challenging to answer, especially on a broader scope, because as a journalist, I'm pretty, specific to my area in terms of what I see on Columbia's campus. But I think, at least what I've seen from talking to people, at Columbia particularly, especially among our protesters, like there is a pretty big contingent of uncommitted / people who are not, who have pretty much decided that they're not willing to like participate in kind of voting because of this particular issue, right? They feel that specifically the Democratic Party has not sufficiently moved the needle in some of the consistent demands. And I think recently, the uncommitted movement offered sort of a non-endorsement, but, talked about how, Kamala Harris and some of other Democratic figures have yet to sort of change in policy or respond at least, or even commit to meeting with some individuals about this. And so I definitely don't have the answers, but I think particular to what I have, seen on my campus and what I see is the issue is it feels like a level of, it's a lack of change. And I think in terms of, as situations have continued to develop, especially, most recently, I think that there has been a level of frustration among some, obviously, young voters about feeling not represented by either party, by not feeling that they have represented the adequate demands, but also, I think, particular to this issue, I think many politicians have treated it as historically too fraught, too complicated, and therefore have not like adequately been able to articulate, anything much beyond that. It's too complicated, like this is our stance, this is sort of where we should leave it at, and left it unchanging. And so I think in terms of, it seems that a lot of young people are really taking on the level of initiative in pushing politicians to think of their positions differently, or at least analyze the ways in which they've, possibly perpetuated certain harms, or also, again, have not been receptive to any level of change. Of course, I think the issue there still lies in the fact that, especially among the Democratic Party, it feels that the scope of, or the range of a viewpoint is very wide. And I think we were even talking about this slightly earlier, but it doesn't always feel that that range of viewpoint is similar in both Democratic Party and the Republican Party, especially, of course, with the rise of Trump as sort of a figure, right? There has been sort of a narrowing of the Republican Party, while there's been a broadening of the Democratic Party, which is really interesting. And so I think looking to the future, that is probably something that we have to just continuously grapple with what does that mean if we have what feels like very lopsided, where if there feels like a very far right, there really, you sort of, if that's only what is represented in one party, and one party is representing such a wide swath of opinion, like how much can we move forward continuously if there's constant sort of disagreement or constant, there is almost like a constant battle again. It's hard to move forward when you're constantly fighting things that feel like you're moving backward. And so I think that is, not necessarily particular to just Israel and Palestine, but I think specifically I see that the Democratic Party has sort of stagnated in moving forward maybe on that issue, or trying to grapple with some contingents of their voters, or young people, or even other types of voters on that, because again, that there's such a preoccupation with fighting what feels like reversals and other issues, or feels like, and I think that that's sort of where we have to see in a broader political scope is, what do we have to confront if we have this very broad party, this very narrow party, and why has that been, continuously bad for our political ecosystem?
Yeah, it's such a great point. And I think the advice I would give is similar to where I started, which is, if something is complex, like especially if it deals with millions of human lives, billions and trillions of dollars, hundreds or thousands of square miles of land, tens of thousands of years of religious history and artifacts, the very human and appropriate urge is to want to fix it this semester. That's right, that's fair. You should want to fix it. I want to fix it this semester, right? But the commitment has to be that you will stay at it for as long as it takes, that you will do a power map and analysis to fix these problems. I have just, in my, and this is where I start sounding like all the old folks that frustrated me. I went to city council meetings at 19 years old in Ithaca because there wasn't enough affordable housing. They said it's complicated, it takes time. And I wasn't want to hear that. 16 years later, right? I was still going to the city council meetings. We created tens of thousands of new affordable housing units. Very proud of that, right? But now I'm going to sound like those old people when I was 19. I have just seen too many movements peter out because those who backed them did not get their way in the first 3 months. And not only the movements peter out, but people's engagement to civics completely, right? Folks say, we need to end climate change. And I'm committed to trying until April. And if I don't end climate change by April, I'm never voting again or participating in anything else again. And that, while human, is defeating. We need to be as broad as the oak trees that bore us forward. Like, we need to be that strong. And I think, I love that you love storytelling, because telling better stories is how we get here. Both telling stories of peace and compassion and identity so that folks can get to know each other, but actually telling better stories in our schools in the first place. Like, I still thought, I went to college thinking that, like, Dr. King gave us civil rights. Like, he gave a speech. There was a march and a speech, and we got civil rights. Oh, and who freed the slaves? Abraham Lincoln. It's like, it took 4 years, but yes, we finally did it. It took 400 years. It took thousands and thousands of people fighting for abolition, millions of people fighting for suffrage, millions of people fighting for civil rights over decades. But because we don't tell those stories appropriately, we keep waiting for a hero to save us. We keep waiting for a moment where a bill gets signed, the issue gets solved. And I think we have to tell more complicated stories so that, what do we call the lessons that we derive from stories? Morals. And we can get a more moral society if we have more accurate and just stories.
Thank you so much. We're going to go back to our students and remind other students in the audience here that we will also take your questions if you have them, as well as our friends on Zoom.
Hi, my name is Ruby. I'm a freshman here at Bennington. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm studying politics and film. My question is specifically for Isabella. So, like, as a student journalist, covering a topic so close to your community, as you mentioned, has been so overwhelming and can get really overwhelming at times. And I just want to know how you begin to cover a story this expansive and this vast, especially over the course of months. It can be so overwhelming to even fathom how you keep up with a story like that. So how was that, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have been on the student newspaper since I was a freshman. And so when I was a freshman, we didn't have this like particular, level of protest or, so that part was new, but the skills that I developed didn't develop in crisis, right? But, I learned about the basics of journalism, through working for my college newspaper. And at that time, we had also very significant issues. I mean, just to refresh a few, our US News ranking scandal, we had one of the biggest strikes in the nation with our graduate students going on strike. And this was when I was a freshman. And we had a lot of really big storylines. Of course, I still, even among those storylines, could not have imagined the level of intensity that I would later approach. But one thing was that, yes, I had developed a lot of the skills and had built a lot of the experience prior to going kind of really into the deep end with this. But as I mentioned earlier, I had served as university news editor through October, November, and December, and then I transitioned into my role as editor-in-chief in December and into January. And so, throughout that time period, right, Columbia became very quickly into the spotlight, but in a lot of ways, it wasn't it really was thrown into it not until later in the year, until the spring semester. And so I think the way that we had really approached it was, again, sort of how we would have approached any other story. I think what we really didn't, it has been exceptional in a lot of ways, and I think in a lot of other ways, it goes back to sticking to the values and the standards that we have always abided by. It was not something that we were particularly treating as unique. We were treating it as any other story that we were following. Of course, it became bigger and more complex as we continued with it. But again, the motivations were always the same for us. And so, I remember in October, again, we immediately, I think the first thing that we ended up covering, I actually ended up being the first person to write a story about the subject matter, because I wrote a story about the statement that my president put out. So, starting at a very basic level, which was just the university president's statement on the events of October 7th. And from there, even in that one story that was pretty simple, we were having a lot of editorial and ethical kind of conversations about what was the language that we were going to use and whose standards were we going to borrow from. We ended up, looking a lot to other publications, the Associated Press, a lot of kind of established organizations. But we had, from the very beginning, these conversations within our newsrooms about what was the impact of our stories, the harms that could potentially be created, how are we going to name or not name people, how are we going to treat photography when we know that we had a commitment to documenting the stories on our campus, but also knew that many students were really afraid of the implications of that. And so I think the way that we ultimately ended up approaching it was, again, very much kind of, in some senses, little by little, and from the very beginning, having a very clear commitment to covering the story. And there were a lot of conversations as well with people who, even inside the newsroom, there were different levels of comfort people had. Not everybody who works for Spectator covers this issue for a wide variety of reasons. And as editor-in-chief, it's actually kind of partially my job to let people know that that's okay, right? That there are many other things that we cover. We cover arts and sports, and there are many things happening on Columbia's campus. This is one of them, of course. And our sports are bad. But we do cover them, but they're bad. But as I was saying, right, there were certain people who were opting into this coverage, and actually it grew over time, right? There were fewer people in the beginning who were willing to take this on, who wanted their names kind of forever attached to reporting on a subject matter, whether they were directly tied to it or deeply connected to it or not. But that expanded over time as people saw the impact and the level of connection that we were building with our community. And as I said, we made mistakes. I look back to the coverage and I can see how our writing, our reporting got better, how we improved our level of accuracy, how we improved our level of sensitivity with the subject matter that we were dealing with, how we were approaching people. People's willingness to talk to us was really, really small at the very beginning. In October, November, nobody wanted to talk to us about this. Nobody wanted to be affiliated with media in general. Again, I think not even particular to this issue, just in general, but particular to Israel and Palestine, there is a level of media distrust that felt very inherent to this. And so a lot of people didn't want to speak to us because they didn't trust us with their narratives. And so what we had to do was build that trust and build proof that people could trust us with their stories. And how we did that was by covering them and by, doing what we could to uphold the standards and values of our newsroom, and over time, building very close relationships with many student groups on our campus. I personally also, outside of even my explicit writing or editing capacity, I was meeting with students, having coffee with students who had concerns over Spectator's coverage, for example, and really trying to listen to why they were worried or what very specific concerns that they may have. And that was very illuminating to me. It's hard to sit across from someone who's kind of criticizing you or criticizing what for me felt like not my life's work, but my very big part of my college experience. But it was also a level of practicing humility and also understanding and empathy for the people that I, again, was constantly engaging with, and being open to that level of criticism, and again, leaning on my peers so heavily, not just internal to the newsroom, but external, to know what are we doing right and what can we do better.
Thank you so much. I see hands. Yes. All right, I'm going to take your question first.
Hi. You've spoken about how collections of stories compile together and make up public perception of what's being covered. And I'm wondering, while writing about the encampments, how did you want to contribute to the public narrative about Columbia protests?
And I'm going to say quickly, we're going to do a lightning round, so we're going to take as many questions as we
Sure.
can and quick answers. Yes.
Okay, so my fast answer is that I think there was a really big misunderstanding as to why the encampment was constructed, and that was one of the things that I was constantly asked when I was going on outside media was, what's the purpose or what's the point? And it was a sort of interesting experience to sort of remind people of the very explicit demands of the encampment. And I think part of what my goal was I knew that there were very many there are many different realities that existed on my campus and still do, and very many different truths of different people's, how people were perceiving the situation, and how people felt in response to the construction of the encampment. And my goal was to, yes, represent that diversity, but also to the extent that I could, again, represent like a basic empathy and understanding for all the individuals who were involved, whether they were people who were, again, participating in the encampment, protesting, whether they were people who had expressed concerns over their personal senses of safety on campus. Again, I think journalism is such a unique position where you're forced to encounter viewpoints of so many different types and truly try to understand and develop them and represent them on a page. And so, yeah, for Spectator, when I was, again, especially when I was encountering outside media, it was such a big thing to establish sort of this just basic facts of like, this is why the encampment protesters are here. It's divestments, it's related to kind of a series of different demands. They expanded over time because of police involvement. And then when I was speaking, I was not speaking from my experiences, I was speaking from the experiences of others, because that's sort of what my job is as a journalist. And he's like, here's what I've heard, here's what people have told me. And these are the concrete experiences of the students on my campus, not things that I've sort of, created or attempted to, fabricate in any way. These are the things that people have told us, and here's those narratives for everyone to see.
Thank you so much. You had your hand up.
I can imagine that, like, during the time of the protests on campus, some or a lot, or at least a part of the people that were involved were people that you probably knew personally or were friends of friends or friends of friends of friends. And I'm just questioning, like, what kind of emotions does, like, such personal reporting awaken, and how did that affect the way you covered the topic, or how did you prevent that from affecting the way you covered the topic?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think particularly for us, the police involvement was probably the most traumatic reporting that we've ever done. And it wasn't just a matter of, again, even for people, there was a diversity of viewpoint on my staff, and people who felt very differently or, had their own biases in terms of either, not even just specific to the encampment, but just in general to the issue. But there was still a common understanding that was some of the hardest things that we saw, was to like watch your friends or peers like be taken away by the NYPD in riot gear, right? And I also was physically present for the like second round of, and many of our reporters were for both rounds of police sweeps, but I was removed from campus as a journalist by police as well. And so we had very direct confrontations on our own, which were still things that I think much of our staff is still processing. I think the way that we sort of managed it was this really interesting experience, because as a journalist, and in many ways, sometimes you're sort of placed in this position where you have to remove yourself and, not to like make a pun on our name, but to be a spectator. And it was so strange and sort of out of body experience to like attempt to place myself as a third party viewer of something that, again, was directly impacting many of the people that I knew in many different ways, certainly impacting myself, impacting my staff. I was not only responsible, again, for my own sort of ways I was coping with this, but the ways that I was seeing my staff struggle with this experience. So I think in a lot of ways, though, it was a strength. It was a way in which we were, again, deeply empathizing with the communities that we were reporting on, from the really heartbreaking stories that we have heard, like, and some of the things that we had seen as well, were really hard to hear, but also it was a practice of very, very deep empathy. And I think that's often what is like missing, or what was missing from reporting external to our publication, was this level of like understanding of the people who are here, of the people that I like go to class with, and otherwise, like, I think that, I had never before this time, or everyone sort of came in with this perspective of Columbia as this like, fiery place where everybody is divided and everybody hates each other and like everyone is just fighting. And like that had never been my perception of like a place that I love still very much and that I loved. And so I think for all of us, like student journalists, we were guided by the Columbia that we knew. We knew a Columbia that was very different from the Columbia that had been projected sort of onto us. And even though it's been like a very difficult time, and it has been a divided time, I have seen people divided in a way I'd never seen on my campus. I know the sort of true aspects of Columbia. I know the people. I know people really care about the place they go to. Even people across different viewpoints. I know that the deep commitment is to the people and the university and academic inquiry and freedom of speech, right? All of these ideas, safety, a space free of discrimination or harassment, these are all tenets of my university that I know are still true and were still true during this time period. And so I think we were really guided by the idea that we have lived the reality that is Columbia for a very long time. And yes, this is a hard time for us, but we know how. We were also in some senses guided by history as well. Again, Spectator existing for over a century, we know how important we are to the community and how many historical events in our past have shaped and forever changed the nature of our university, ultimately for the better.
We have 9 minutes left, so I'm going to ask folks to brief if possible. And Svante, we have a question here for you. If you would talk a little bit about, as mayor and as a city council person, talk a little bit about your relationship with the press in Ithaca. And then also, there are countless young Americans out there in the United States right now looking to get involved in the national conversation. If you could say a few words about how students might do that.
Yeah, sure. My relationship with the press. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. No, I actually I do think, and maybe you've experienced this, being under such a bright spotlight at such a young age, that I think every reporter should be written about at least once, just so they can be like, oh, wow, that's what that feels like, right? Because I think it does help create this sort of empathy that you are speaking so passionately about. I actually liked all of our media. We were very lucky in Ithaca to have a strong and robust local media, several local outlets, TV as well as radio and print, a new online paper that supplanted even the Ithaca Journal and the Cornell Daily Sun. And I thought of us as, they were sort of the referees in the basketball game, right? I was playing in the game, and I was trying to win the game, right? But they were making the game possible. They weren't my opponent in the game, right? Sometimes I was yelling at them, saying, you missed that call. What are you doing? Sometimes I yelled at them publicly. Never yelled, I don't yell. But I would tweet and subtweet at them. But I never viewed them as the opponent, and I think that's really important. You really are, you're not on the same team, but you're in the same project. That project is a functioning country and a democracy, right? And they're there to make sure that the game happens, and you're there to participate in the game. So if you turn them into the actual enemy, it's bad for everybody. How do people get involved? The best way to get involved is go to peoplefortheamericanway.org. That's peoplefortheamericanway.org. But of course, there's 100 ways to get involved. All you gotta ask yourself is, the next time, and I used to do this, my mom would make me do this, the next time you start complaining about they, she's like, write down who they are. Because if I have to keep hearing about they, I'm gonna lose it. Because I kept coming home in my village and be like, they made the sidewalks too narrow. They need to improve the school lunches. They need to, the basketball court is arranged east-west. It should be north-south, so that the sun's not in your eyes. And she's like, I don't know who these they people are, but if you don't just figure it out so you can stop bothering me with it, and then go do that thing. I think whoever you find yourself complaining about they the most, research who that is, and then find a mentor. It's best advice. Find a mentor in the field that you're interested in.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes left, so I need a short, pithy question with a short, pithy answer. All right. I'll give you the microphone so we can hear you.
Were all the students on campus students? Were all the people that we saw on television, were they students all?
The majority of which were, yes.
And the others?
There were some alum, there were also some faculty that were involved, and there were also a handful of students from other universities who had participated in the encampment as well.
And we hear a lot about anti-Semitism in various institutions. You know, those cities. Give me a feeling of is there anti-Semitism among the students?
I mean, I think, citing directly to our reporting, that is certainly like experiences that we have captured in terms of direct incidents of anti-Semitism that students have experienced both on and off campus. I think in reporting a lot of these stories, we have we've also done situations in which we've had direct police reports, or we've had, not just the narrative of directly just students, but also a series of different sourcing and reporting on this issue in particular. I think there is the wide sweeping claim of like that all students at Columbia are anti-Semitic, or these broad generalizations is sort of what we have aimed to best capture in our reporting, or I should say combat in our reporting, is how we can report on certain incidents, or how we can report on certainly hate that has existed on our campus, or that the rhetoric of certain students or actions of certain students, but how that is not representative of every single person either involved or every single person who is at Columbia. Absolutely. I think it has been a very complicated subject matter. I think, like I said, in our reporting, we have captured those experiences as much as we have captured the experiences of protesters and of the encampment and of administrative crackdown and limitations on protests. Like I said earlier, there does seem to be a situation, or what we've felt in our reporting is that there seems to be the existence of multiple different realities and multiple different truths for different types of students on our campus. Everything from, yes, students who have expressed deep concern, and not just students, faculty as well, deep concern with anti-Semitism on campus, others who have expressed deep concern with Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian rhetoric, other students who have felt that freedom of speech has been severely limited, as well as that administration has not worked on behalf of students in all regards. And I think that's sort of what's interestingly unifying at Columbia, is that no matter the experience, yes, there are all these different realities. It does seem that from all angles, people are saying administration is just not doing enough to sort of grapple with these issues, and like, how do we protect our students and allow open inquiry and freedom of speech and such. So I think, yeah, directly in response to your question, the reporting kind of speaks for itself, and like I said, my goal is to always platform the experiences of others and let others speak for their own experiences, and that's certainly what we've captured, especially at a university that has a very large population of Jewish and Israeli students, and also a large population of Arab and Muslim students, and those are the stories that we really look to highlight in our reporting and platform in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things about being a journalist is not being afraid to, confront very challenging issues, or things that people would probably voluntarily keep at arm's length if they weren't directly tied to it. But it's something that we have voluntarily decided is such an important facet of our community in capturing the experiences, the many different experiences of students on our campus. And so, certainly there has been much discussion about hate on our campus. There are also external factors, right? We have congressional probes into anti-Semitism on Columbia's campus, and that has also kind of added to the equation and how we sort of view this issue. And so certainly, what I would say is that we have many different stories about that exact idea. If you're interested in reading about sort of very explicitly how that looks on Columbia's campus and what people have expressed, but also the ways in which, the university has attempted to at least address or combat it, or the many different sort of views as well, because there were many Jewish individuals who were involved in the encampment as well. And so that was another layer for us. So lots of nuance, but also the answer is yes, but also there's yes to a lot of other questions as well. And so, yeah.
We do have to start our From the Field in a moment, but I do, if I may, final brief question. Please, would you both briefly state whether or not you think Gen Z is going to show up in November? Go for it.
Yeah, I do. Gen Z's, my experience is that they're a show-up kind of people, very politically engaged, locked in. I don't know who you're all going to vote for, but I predict that you're all going to go and vote, even if you write in yourself or me or her. I also think this is not the kind of generation, we've seen generations like this before, that only show up in November, right? Like they show up in November once every 4 years and then go back to working at Goldman. I think this is a very committed, civically engaged, politically lit up, not just the situation in Israel and Palestine, but also the failure to address climate change and school shootings and mass violence, the end of Roe v. Wade, and on and on and on, has churned out a generation that is rightfully pissed off at the generations above it.
You get the last word.
Yeah, I'm gonna say yes. My slightly hot take, though, in adding to this would just be that what I do resent from perhaps other generations, but when discussing this is the ease with which we blame the young generation with, if a certain outcome happens in November that we are unhappy with. I hope that Gen Z is not blamed for our decisions or lack of decisions or whatever it is, because there are confluence of reasons a certain outcome could happen, and we should all hold accountability in that. And so yes, I do urge obviously our own generation to hold accountability to figure out what our own civic engagement looks like, whether that is voting or many other ways in which we can engage with the issues of our time. But I also hope that we all take accountability in a much larger system and a much larger. Right. Just avocado toast and that's it. Right. But yes, that's we all take accountability and something that we all participate in, and that we are not so fast to judge or blame young people for the political decisions that they make when the outcome is for so many different reasons, and we should all take blame to some extent.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of our guests. For a stimulating conversation and an honest conversation. Deeply appreciate your answers and deeply appreciate the passion on both sides, and hope that students here and those on Zoom took away a lot that is meaningful about how we build this democracy, not just build it, but build it together. And in that regard, Brian, you're going to take us to the field.
So two things I'd say. First of all, Susan Scorbati and I were just saying we could have a conversation with these two individuals for hours. And there is coffee out there. And so that means you could have conversations perhaps for hours. And so afterward, please go out, have a cup of coffee, and engage these two remarkable individuals. Every week, as you may remember, we do something from the field. We touch base with an organization or an individual that is out there doing something around democracy. So Gary, are you with us? I know I saw you pop up. There you are. And Gary is joining us from Georgia. And Gary, welcome to Bennington College virtually. And I'm wondering if you would please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you have gotten involved in politics in Georgia.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Hello. Yeah, my name is Gary Dickenberg. I'm a New Yorker transplanted down here to Georgia. Been down 30 years down here. We're in the northern suburbs, not in the city of Atlanta. These are the suburbs that were so instrumental in getting the two Democratic senators and others elected and Georgia going blue last cycle. The organization that I'm a part of, I didn't start it, is a meetup group that started as a dinner group, really, called Needles in a Haystack. And the name suggests that being a liberal in Georgia felt very much like being a needle in a haystack. So we started out with about 11 people. I joined, I guess I was the 12th or so person. We would have dinners and so on. we started to grow and do different activities. And we now have 2,250 people that have joined us. It's really the greenest of the, they call it astroturf. These are, you know, the sprouts that go up in kind of ad hoc kind of manner. We support the local Democratic Party here, Fulton County. Fulton County is very big. Atlanta is a part of Fulton County. We were very instrumental in getting Ossoff and Warnock both elected. In fact, I ran our primary debate where we had 700 people show up. I was the moderator, and the New York Times featured us. We have been involved in this election. Obviously, we are not neutral. We are very much on the Harris or Democratic side, and doing all we can to get her over the line, especially Georgia, although Georgia is going to be a tough nut to crack, I think, this particular cycle. I'm an organizational psychologist by background. I've had a consulting business for 30 years, now retired. And most of the needles in a haystack, maybe we're the haystack now, not the needles anymore. But as the needles in a haystack, we tend to skew older and more retirees than younger people. But we're very active. We have social activities as well as political activities, mostly social activities because politics happens, well, it happens every year, but it's kind of infrequent, if you get my meaning. So that's a little bit about our organization as I see it.
And would you just say, tell us, Gary, are any, from what you're seeing down in Georgia right now, do you have a sense, you know, we've been talking about Gen Z,
Yep.
we just heard, of course, all generations are going to be involved in this election.
Right.
Do you have a sense of, is there a youth movement out there?
I'm not that much on college campuses. There's Kennesaw State, of course, Emory are the big colleges here, and of course, the University of Georgia is in Athens. It's about an hour and a half away. So this is not a college town so much it is the suburbs. But one thing I can say is that this particular cycle, we live in a subdivision with 105 homes. There is one national sign in all the yards, one, and that's the Harris Waltz sign in my yard. But there are no other signs. And no other signs, I was driving around the other day and I was looking for signs, because signs are relatively a strong indication of interest, powerful interest. You go maybe in half an hour outside of here and you get to Cumming, which is part of Forsyth, Georgia, which is only recently they had the KKK marched there about 20 years ago. So it's not exactly, downtown New York. It's not Brooklyn. A lot of good old boys that live there. So my sense of it is, the direct answer to your question is I'm not sure, but I think we're reflective of the general population here in Georgia. I think it's going to be close. I think, I was listening to the conversation earlier from the folks from Columbia, or the woman from Columbia, and to the extent that Gen Z is involved. I have a 24-year-old daughter who is very involved. So, people are involved. I think people are interested, especially since abortion became a key issue for a lot of people, a lot of women particularly, a lot of young men too, by the way. So I think because of those things, I think Gen Z is very involved in this particular election, especially young men. Young men tend to like Trump's very much for some reason. Yeah.
So we have one question online, and then we can let you go. We've been trying to keep our sort of from the fields, 10, 15 minutes. And the question is, what motivated you to get involved with this organization? What got you to that first dinner party? And then what about your generation, this person, all in caps? Or do you think your generation is going to turn out for this election?
It's a turnout election. This is a turnout election. I think, one thing about Trump, love him or hate it, everybody has an opinion. And I think that because of that, it's not like a situation when you have two moderates like, we had Romney or McCain, for example, and Obama. Obama was quite an important election because as the first black president, although some say Clinton was the first black president, the real feeling is that this is a turnout election, and I think people have very strong feelings and want to vote those feelings. That's my sense of things. So we'll see what happens. I feel, it looks like it's going to be very, very tight here in Georgia. It was only separated by 11,000 votes. You may remember Trump asked for those votes, by the way, to find 11,801, just one more than the other. And Raffensperger looked in his pockets and couldn't find any of them for some reason. So you're going to see people coming out this time and voting very strongly. We'll see what happens.
And then I'm just going to ask this, do you have the same Secretary of State now that you had 4 years ago?
Yes. Yes, that'll change after the election, but it's goes right through the election.
So is the current Secretary of State not up for re-election?
I don't know, but I think he's up. I think he is up, actually.
Okay.
Although I think it might be an off cycle, not presidential cycle, it may be 2026, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
We'll stay in touch. We may touch base with you again down the road, but for now, thank you. Please join me in thanking Gary for zooming in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vote, 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 vote. Everybody vote. Okay.
Okay, now I'm going to pass it on to Susan, who is going to talk, as she has every week, in her closing remarks, an action, a call to action.
Okay, thank you, everyone, here and in online. We're going to start with our call to action tonight. Abrar has a brief report on the website and how things are going with the website, and then we'll go to our call to action.
Thank you, Susan. So I will tell you about, I actually, when the question came that is Gen Z going to be involved in this election, what do you think? I was like, please ask me this question because I have a report. But before I jump to that, I just want to explain in very brief why this is very important for me. As many of you already know that I cannot vote in US because I'm an international student here. And the reason why election and democracy is so important to me is because I have seen it, I have seen democracy fail. I have seen a democracy collapsing. And some of you might know here that Bennington is not my first college. I went to University of Dhaka, which is like the #1 public research university in Bangladesh with like less than 7% acceptance rate. And just a few weeks ago, I got a few videos and pictures from my friends from my previous college. It was a video where I was with 85 other students in a room, and the person who was taking the video shot that video because he did not have a place even to sit down in that room. And I slept in that room. The reason is the student wing of the government used to control the universities. So they would keep us like that, and our reward of following the government blindly was that they would move us to a less crowded room. And when I would write like blog posts and social media posts about these things, I have a screenshot, my mom asking me that, please stop writing this. We really love you and we don't want to lose you. I had a whole slideshow about that, but I have a class this time, so I couldn't show it. So jumping to the update of the website, this is why democracy is very important to me. So I launched a website like 45 days ago. It's myballot.info. And I am very happy to share that we have reached over 100,000 visitors yesterday. And when I say that, like Taylor Swift, like a couple days ago, she sent 4 million requests, vote.gov. And I'm like, Taylor Swift, 4 million, Abrar Orpon, 100,000. That's totally fine because this is just Abrar Orpon who can't even vote. And, you know, so yeah, 100,000 visitors in myballot.info. Please share this website with your friends, with families, with people who once helped to register to vote. It's basically same thing as vote.gov, but you get more information and it's neatly arranged. And I want all of you to be part of this change, because if you lose democracy, it's not just you lose your freedom of expression, you just don't lose your voice, you lose your future. Thank you so much. Please vote.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Abrar. Okay, so to end this evening, we're going to look at our call to action number 3. Oh, we'll see if we can find the slide. Yeah, coming up. Okay, great, thank you. I hope everybody online can see the slide as well. Okay, so, and we keep always going back to our first one to keep focusing on all of these so that it's not just about one every week, but we're accumulating. So as Abrar just said, register to vote, and that's for everyone. Educate yourself about down ballot, because we know, especially people online, but also in this room, many students are from states from all over the country. So really spend your time, look at your Senate, your House of Representatives, your school boards, your mayors, right? All of the different elections, so that when you go to vote, you don't have to ask someone, or you don't know these names that are on your ballot. And so tonight, we're adding participation in civic education. So I think we've had 2 amazing guests who've really reflected their own commitment to being a part of a world where they are educating people every day, and we certainly learned a lot from them tonight. So in whatever way, and I don't think there is one way, in whatever way you want to participate in your community, that's what I think we're all challenging ourselves right now to understand. If we have been taking democracy for granted, then what does it look like if we don't take it for granted? Like, how do our lives change? What do we do every week? How do we even think about it every day? And that's for international students as well, as Abrar said. Many countries around the world are really being challenged by whether they have lost their democracy, whether it's still possible to recover. And so this is a worldwide phenomenon that we're all involved in, and we need to really do our part. And then I want to just say briefly, there is a QR for particularly people who are, able to easily, not like me, who still doesn't totally get the QR codes, but you just need to go up, and we tried it out with your camera and take a picture, and it will take you to a survey from civicstory.org. And I just want to say that this amazing person this week, Susan Haig from South Orange, New Jersey, got in touch, and her group, she founded, and she's actually the conductor of the South Orange Symphony Orchestra. And she decided to found this organization called civic.story.org. And she works with middle school students, she works with college students, really about civics, the environment. They're very active, they're real activists. And so she got in touch with me this week and said, could we please fill out her survey? And so we've had a whole bunch of people, and this is the reason. You'll see if you feel like doing it, it takes literally 5 minutes to fill out the survey. And it's just interesting because the questions are really interesting about, like, what do you know or really not know about an interesting range of questions about our government, about the environment. And what she wants to do is take the results of the survey, particularly for Gen Z, and really send them to politicians widely around the country so that they hear about the issues that Gen Z really cares about. So that's the point of the survey, but I think any age, she's really appreciating them getting this information. So I'm just saying, if you wanted to do that after, it closes at 10 o'clock tonight. So there's no pressure, but if you do want to do it, please go ahead. Okay, so we're going to conclude our evening. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week, where we're talking about higher education, civil discourse, and our democracy. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.